I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today for our panel on social consciousness in research, ethics, the environment, and social justice. The panel was actually put together to help us focus our attention on important social issues and consider how science and research can actually contribute to social change. And the topic itself was actually chosen by symposium participants and registrants through a survey that we sent out, asking for feedback on potential panels. And I think this choice actually reflects the subject's current relevance and timeliness. And so today we're very lucky to have with us three researchers who will be talking to us about ethics, environmental, and social justice, the role that these play in their research and the potential impact beyond academia. And so let me briefly introduce them to you. We have Nikith Kalkunte, a PhD candidate in biomedical engineering at the University of Texas, Austin. Madeline Anderson Jimenez, PhD candidate in marine biology at Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego, and Ailey Carrero Pinedo, a graduate psychologist in the Los Angeles area. And so I would ask each of you just to quickly introduce yourselves a bit more and tell us about your research, and then we'll have some questions to get the conversation going. So maybe Nikith, could you start us off?
Sure. So my name is Nikith. As was previously mentioned, I'm a PhD candidate in biomedical engineering, and my work specifically investigates stem cell differentiation. So what we do is we use stem cells to answer some key questions about how organs develop in an embryo and in kind of uterus, to then try to better recapitulate that in the lab to hopefully, cure disease that actually happens, in kind of congenital failures and things like that. So really kind of using stem cells to kind of model what already happens in the human body to try to answer some key questions there.
Thank you, Nikith. Madeline.
Hi, everyone. I'm Madeline. So yes, I study marine biology. Specifically, I study benthic ecology. So my research is focused on understanding how humans can impact marine ecosystems in both tropical or coral reef and temperate kelp forests and intertidal ecosystems in order to better protect them from local and global stressors. So I'm interested in the ecology of how these ecosystems work and how they may function under global change.
Thank you, Madeline. And then Ailey.
Hi, everyone. I have a PhD in counseling psychology from the University of North Dakota, and I consider myself scholar practitioner as well as an advocate, and all those things combined, the type of work that I do, although right now is mostly focused on clinical work, it is actually informed by both psychology and public health, in which I look at how social determinants impact mental health outcomes for people of color, particularly Latinx immigrants, and also how they exacerbate racial trauma for communities across the board.
Thank you. And thank you again for joining us. So my first question, I think this is one that all high school students are curious about, is how did you end up studying what you're studying? And I think we can go in the same order that we went for the introductions.
Yeah, so I ended up in biomedical engineering and specifically studying the heart because I was always fascinated by how things worked. Right, that's kind of the classic engineer example, or the engineer answer, right? Is I loved, breaking down the Legos and all of that stuff. And in my high school biology class, I realized like the most complicated machine to ever exist is the human body, right? There are so many things happening at every single scale, right? That work in orchestra to actually allow us to function at incredibly high levels. And so that just kind of was really what interested me. The heart is also a fascinating machine, and that there, again, you have so many different things operating at different scales to force blood through your body to make sure that you're alive. And so, yeah, it really is just interesting and amazing to be able to answer these questions about, how do these things work?
Yeah, so I became interested in studying marine biology. I've always loved the ocean since I was little, so that was a very easy passion. And then I fell in love with like science and biology and chemistry, and there's just no end to like the interdisciplinary nature of ocean science. And takes, you can do any type of science really to answer the questions I'm interested in, from chemistry, engineering, and of course biology. And I became really interested in studying global change because climate change, just growing up in my generation, is a huge issue, very big. And I just became really interested in what we can do as scientists to, help not only the natural environment, but ourselves, and kind of save these ecosystems that we love. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think my journey was a little bit different. As someone who was previously undocumented, I really saw the path to getting a PhD as a way to be a systems changer and a systems shaker. And what I mean with that is, ever since I was an undergraduate student, I really saw the big gaps and disparities when it came to mental health services, particularly for people who are Spanish speaking, and to help mitigate those disparities, but also be an agent of social change. Psychology really was the path, not only for repair, but also I see psychology also as a science that really can make an impact in different like social spheres. And it was one of those things where I think counseling psychology found me, and I am so glad to be part of this field.
Thank you. So our next question, and it's actually one that's echoed in the audience, which I think is great because it means we're on the right track in thinking about this, is what kind of role and then, each of you will talk in terms of your own area of specialization, but what role do ethics, environmental justice, or social justice play in your research? And then conversely, how is the research process informed by questions of ethics, environmental justice, or social justice?
Yeah, so in my work, of the three things that can be talked about, right? Ethics, social justice, environmental justice. Ethics is probably the biggest one. And that's really because I work with human tissue, right? So these are cells that have been harvested from humans, and we're doing science on them, right? And so the ethics are kind of in different ways. You have, first and foremost, stem cell biology, which really kind of originated in using embryonic tissue, right, to kind of source that tissue and then be able to use it. So there was a lot of ethical dilemmas surrounding, how that tissue was sourced and kind of where that was sourced from. Nowadays, we actually are able to use stem cells that are derived from adults. And in that way, you don't have to deal with a lot of the ethical dilemmas around that, but you still have around the source of the tissue, but you do have to deal with the ethical choices that are being made about who is being from whom is that tissue being sourced from, right? Because we know that the identity of the individual, right, whether it be even as simple as male versus female, right, or and then you can kind of delve into race and ethnicity and kind of those cross sections. All of those, relate to the actual science that's being produced, right? The actual data and the relevance of that data to different populations. So it's kind of on both sides in terms of where you're sourcing from, and then also the impacts of your science in terms of it being relevant and relatable to the general population.
Yeah, so mine definitely plays in with environmental justice. So much of my research has direct ecological conservation relevance. It really informs my research and is really part of the big questions that I ask as a scientist. And in my research, and in this day and age, it's kind of our responsibility as scientists to not only kind of document the current status of these marine ecosystems that I study, but to really document the impacts that humans have both locally and globally, and also to identify ways in which we can live more sustainably with these systems. I study island systems, and definitely also social justice comes into that in terms of empowering local communities to kind of use technologies to document their ecosystems, like coral reefs, and like photomosaic tree, where we use like cameras and teach local communities how to use cameras in order to document change in their own coral reefs, learning from others about fisheries, and kind of trying to just share that sort of, I guess, hierarchy or privilege that we have as like scientists in America, with countries that are maybe more needing of it, especially in terms of coral reef research. But yeah, so environmental justice informs all of my science, and that we use our insights and our data to evaluate the effectiveness of various management strategies on these threatened ecosystems, and really ask like how is environmental injustice affecting our ecosystems.
For me, social justice is at the core of everything that I do. It informs my research questions, and it also helps me better understand and advocate and affirm different types of knowledges that are available outside of a Western lens. And in relation to like ethics and environmental justice, actually, that also helps inform the ethics of it too, because oftentimes historically research has been known to just extract from communities rather than giving back. While the scholar might be elevated at the social level, but the communities where this knowledge came from remains the same. So that's what social justice and ethics is really intertwined. And also as a psychologist, environmental justice is also really part of the work that I do because of the racial trauma that often comes with it. Very recently, there's been lots of news reports related to Hurricane Fiona, for example, in Puerto Rico, which is a colony of the United States. There is going to be a lot of people from Puerto Rico that are probably going to come to the mainland, and they're going to still continuing, right, to have the effects of the aftermath. So all those things are really linked together in the work that I do. And also when I think about specific research questions, it is actually something that oftentimes we see in clinical practice before it becomes a research study and then published. So in a way, practice really informs research, and research really informs practice in the work that I do.
Thank you all. I think just to sort of tap onto like what Eilis was saying, it's almost hard to like disentangle the two, right? There has to be this like constant conversation between practice and research and findings and research. So I want to move to some questions from the audience because I think they're great. And so one of them is, what is the biggest roadblock you've experienced in your research? And if it's not a roadblock, what is the most challenging part for you to achieve or understand? Again, I think also connected to the lens of like ethics, environmental justice, and social justice. And so, Nikith, can you start us off?
Yeah, I think that there's a variety of roadblocks, right? Research is not easy by any means. It oftentimes is 90% failure and 10% success, and I think that's common across any type of research. And so I think that's an obvious choice, right? Things not working, kind of your ideas not panning out maybe the way that you expected them to, your hypotheses not being proven. But I think honestly, maybe thinking about more of the topics that we're talking about, one of the biggest roadblocks that I'm facing in my research is how to make sure that it's relevant to clinical outcomes, right? I think so often research, especially in the biomedical field, is not rooted in why it's being funded, right? Which is to help human health, right? To improve human health. And so it's really thinking about, how can I make my research translatable, right? How can I design my hypotheses and the experiments that I'm running to really maximize the impact that I can have on cardiac disease, right? On these things, because the easiest thing to do is to not think about those things, right? To do those things is additional taxation on my time and my energy and my effort to take that next step and actually think about the translatability. So I think that's kind of, that's really what I'm struggling with, frankly, right now is really, I've done this science, is it relevant, and how can I make the future science that I do even more relevant?
Yeah, agreed. With the roadblocks being sometimes you do a lot of work and you don't get a significant result. But another big roadblock is definitely for me funding. Just environmental and ocean conservation is a very sort of unfunded sector of biology, but also just making my research relevant in terms of getting people to care about ocean conservation and ocean science, kind of trying to lift other people up in other communities like that are experiencing, you know, more environmental injustice than others, and kind of trying to get the research out there. I think there's a lot of disconnect between kind of the science that marine biologists and conservation and environmental scientists are doing and kind of what's out there in popular news and media. I think it's becoming more and more of a topic in popular culture and in society, talking about conservation, environmental conservation. But I think there's still a lot of disconnect between the actual science about what we actually need to do, and kind of what we need to like implement in place to get, you know, projections of climate change back down, how to like rehabilitate basically broken ecosystems, and kind of like why that's important. So a lot of that has to do with putting a dollar value sometimes on these marine ecosystems I study, and kind of doing a lot of modeling to project, you know, this is how much we might lose, you know, aside from livelihood and cultural importance, but a dollar value on what we might lose if we lose these ecosystems. So trying to make, again, yeah, repeating, but make my research relevant.
Yeah, I want to bring a different lens, you know, outside of the ebbs and flows of what happens when we do research, and definitely funding is a huge issue across the board. I really want to kind of just bring in oftentimes the experiences that come with people not believing in you in the first place, that you're able to complete a certain type of research. So just to give just a personal example, my dissertation was focused on how legal status should be considered a social determinant of mental health for immigrants of Latinx descent. And I don't have enough fingers, I guess I should say, for the number of people who told me that this research was too risky, that I should not do it, and completely tried to convince me otherwise. When in reality, I kind of just really used that doubt as my motivation to be able to complete it, and very successfully, actually. So I think part of the roadblocks too is sometimes you will have people who are going to be naysayers in the work that you do, but to not let that define you, and to also not let that discourage you from what your purpose and what your call has been. And I think both of my peers here and the panelists can probably agree that graduate school is not easy. And I think it's really important to be very transparent about that. And that's why, like, really relying on community and relying on the values that are important to you, but also in people who are not only in your graduate program, but also outside of your graduate program, is going to be absolutely like critical for you to be able to be successful and be able to overcome those barriers.
Excellent advice, and just like a great way to think about it. And yes, it's true, grad school is not easy, but you have to be as positive as you can. And I think Ailey pointed out some very good points, which is like you have to believe in yourself, right? Because there might be others who won't. I think just a quick question that is from the audience, and sort of related to some things that Nikith and Madeline mentioned, which was a more practical question. How important do you think null results are, and is it worth publishing them? And I think maybe one of you can answer that so that we'll have enough time to move on to the next question. So Nikith, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I think null results are incredibly important. At the end of the day, science is an accumulation or a cumulative, sum game, right? Where we need to know as much about how things work as much as we need to know about how they don't work, right? And what doesn't work in these things. And so I think definitely in scientific publishing and research, there is a push to have some like exciting new results, right? That is innovative and pushing forward in a way. And null results are looked down upon, right? Because they don't actually prove anything new, right? In that framework way. So I'm facing that right now, where I'm trying to publish something and no one wants to publish it because it's not new and exciting, but it is a null result. And so I definitely think it's important to do that.
Thank you. So I think we have time for a couple more questions. One thing that we discussed previously amongst ourselves was just kind of the limited time that we have as researchers. And so in your case, how, you split that time between scientific research, but then also thinking about the societal impact that your research can have. How are you able to balance those two, if you are, and do you have any advice for someone who's pursuing a similar path? And maybe Madeline can start us off.
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. I definitely spent my time doing communication and outreach for my field of study, trying to get scientific results to an audience beyond scientists, communicating science in different ways, like through media and online, trying to reach like a broader audience who maybe might not otherwise get to like see or learn about it. And just trying to get that field of ocean science and marine biology like into more underserved communities. Luckily in San Diego, there's a lot of really great programs, and I work with some underserved youth going out in the field doing tide pooling, and just trying to share kind of like what it's like to be a marine biologist kind of with communities who might not otherwise get to see what a marine biologist looks like or does. And then just trying to reach a world outside of the little bubble of academia is definitely takes a lot of time. It's definitely, I'm trying to publish my paper, but I'm also trying to translate that paper as something, that could be used for policy, that could be used for funding, that could be used, for resource management, agencies, industry, and then also trying to translate it as a something in the real world too, I guess, or to the general public. And so I split a lot of time doing outreach and communication.
Thank you. And Ailey?
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind was cross-cultural collaborations, but also interdisciplinary work. Those two have been really critical, particularly in the field of trauma psychology, which is kind of like my main area of focus. And the reason I say that, because rather than reinventing the wheel or having this be an endeavor that I take on my own, I try to really build community outside of like my immediate like work environment to really get a sense as to, okay, what are people doing boots on the ground? What are things that I can contribute rather than like kind of extract or take away, right, from the efforts of people that have already grassroots on this particular topic. And then that as a way, then I kind of really bring my scientist practitioner training into the mold to really strengthen the advocacy efforts that we're trying to convey, but also the policy impact that we're trying to have, both at local, regional, and national levels.
Thank you, Ailey. And just like to quickly wrap up with one final question, I guess, and I love this one, it's from the audience. The question is, what advice do you actually have for students who want to pursue an academic career in order to then create positive community impact? And maybe Nikith, you can start us off.
Yeah, I think the answer that I have there is to spend a lot of time looking around your community for problems to solve, right? I think that's kind of the biggest, my gripe with academia right now is that it, at least in my field, it seems so separated from the actual problems that are afflicting my local community, right? And so if we approach it more from a lens of like, okay, what are the common problems that are actually affecting a lot of people in my local community, and then actually structure our problem and our work around those, then it flows immediately, right? What I do is directly community and change lives. So yeah, I think that's just kind of I'm trying to do that with kind of the next project that I'm on is really kind of take a problem-oriented structure to it as opposed to maybe where the money is or kind of what the field wants me to do. But I think that's difficult, right? All of us kind of have to do our part there.
Thank you. Madeline?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think similarly, finding a question that you're really passionate about that like affects, your life, your community, and the sort of environment you're in and what you can do with that. And I think finding, a community that is asking the same questions, that's passionate about similar things, and really just going for it and like volunteering. Like I'm still in the lab that I volunteered with as an undergraduate, and I absolutely love it. It's very female dominated, and I can't say enough how much I love my lab, but finding that community of people who are passionate about, the questions you're passionate about asking, and just going for it.
Thank you. And Eileen?
For me, one of the things is really being cognizant as to like, is the question that I'm seeking to answer going to have the impact that I think it will be, unless I'm actually involving the people that are going to be directly related to that. So that's why I think really having like community-based participatory research, for example, as something that is really guiding the work that you're doing, it's going to be really important. And I also know that also depends what type of field you're going to go into. It doesn't apply for everything. So I want to put the caveat there. And at the same time, though, it is also possible to have a positive impact on society and not be an academic. So I also want to make sure I offer that as an option. And because kind of like what was mentioned previously, academia can be very rigid, and at the same time, it can be a great tool for social change. So I think it's important to offer both sides of the coin as part of this conversation.
Thank you. And thank you all, because I think I'm hearing like so many common threads in how you're answering the questions, which makes it even more exciting, right? Because we're talking about someone who's in marine biology, someone who's specialized in biomedical engineering, and someone else who's a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. And just to see these common threads in all these different subjects, I think is really inspiring and really exciting, especially if you're a high school student, because you can be passionate about a subject and you can think about how that will be impacted by and how it can impact questions of ethics, questions of environmental justice, and questions of social justice. And I think what all three of you brought up today, which I would want to leave our audience with, is the idea that like you should connect with your community, see what the problems are, talk to people, involve them, make sure that their voices are included, and actually just like have your research be a platform for those voices of the problems that you're thinking about and wanting to solve. So thank you all. And I'm so excited to have you three as our mentors and also as being part of this panel. I'm so glad that you had the availability to join us on a Saturday morning. And thank you so much. And thank you to our audience members as well. And I hope you'll have a chance to go and pop into other panels today. I think our Polygen students are doing some great research, and I think you'll be really excited to see it and maybe even inspired by it. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your Saturday.